Alright, so we're down to the last two parts. That's the rotary encoder and the vacuum tube itself. I'm going to start with the encoder, and it's pretty straightforward. Requires a little bit of finesse and can't really do it in the vise, so I'm going to take the board out of the vise and I'll try to keep it in view of the camera and see what we do here. I think we can still see that pretty well. So the encoder goes in on the same side as the power connector, and it's got little curved connectors that cause it to snap in. You can see those from the bottom. And when I say it requires a little bit of finesse, the trick is to get it to be square with the board and not angled at all, and you want that so that everything looks good from the back of the board once it's finished. The easiest way to do that is just to get it nice and tight against the board, and it does have a square bottom, so that will cause it to square off. One thing that works pretty well is just to use a rubber band to hold it down. That gives a little bit of tension. Let's see if we can get that. And you want the rubber band to be across the top and not the axle, otherwise it will be off center. It's actually not helping at all, so I'm just going to forget about it. So, next trick is just to get one pin soldered and then holding everything in your hand with the soldering iron in your other hand. If it's not perfectly square, you can melt the solder on that pin and let it reflow, and that should square it up. So that's what I'm going to do. So I need to flux the pads. And you want to solder one of the small pins, not the two large ones. Those come last. So, just going to get a little bit of solder on the tip here. Since this is a through-hole component, you can use more solder than you would for a surface mount one. The hole will soak up some of the solder. So we're just going to touch that to one of the small pins, and the pin actually soaked up quite a bit of solder, so I'm going to need a little bit more here. There we go. Now that's covering the whole pin. So now I'm just going to take a look at the bottom here and see if it's square. Look at it from both sides, make sure that it's sitting flat and that it's square to the board. Looks pretty good, but just to be safe, I'm going to hold the board like this, and using my thumb I'm going to put some pressure against the rotary encoder, hold it nice and flat and square, and then I'm just going to touch the iron to the solder. It'll melt, and when you pull it away it'll solidify, and that should hold it nice and square. I'm going to get one more pin in there to make sure it's being held nice and solid. Then check it out. Yeah, it looks really good. So at this point, we can actually throw the board back in the vise and get the rest of these pins soldered up. Actually, I'm lying, aren't I? I can't put it in the vise with the encoder that way. So I can usually use the pana vise and turn it so that it's straight up, and then put the board in sideways, and that works fine, but that won't work for the video camera, so I'm just gonna let this one sit on the table and do it by hand. If you have to do this, if you have to put your board on a table instead of having it in a vise, it's handy to put a little bit of weight on it to hold things still as you work. So I usually just use a pair of pliers and just set one end right on the board. So we can solder the rest of these pins up pretty quick. And then the two large pins, we'll use a huge amount of solder. These are the pins that hold the thing stable while you're turning it and pressing it. So you want to use plenty of solder. It's going to flow through the hole and onto the other side, and you want to get a good coating on both sides. So basically just keep feeding solder until you see it fill the hole. And then around the back as well. That looks pretty good. I've still got my last two pins here at the back. Need to be soldered. And that's that. After soldering this, due to those two large pins and all the heat we put into it, the top of the encoder will still be pretty hot, so be careful there. So now I'm prepared to solder the tube in.